All right. And so with that, I'm going to share my screen and we are going to kick off this workshop. Thank you everyone for joining us. We are, if you're watching this, live on X, LinkedIn, or YouTube, or if you're tuning in live through Zoom, happy to have you all here. We're going to talk about MCP and servers, Mastra, and look at a lot of code today too. So we'll talk through a little bit about just some background on MCP. I'm curious if you've all if you do want to post in the chat how much experience you have. Have you used MCP before? Are you still relatively uh, new to it, trying to figure it out? Curious on how everyone's feeling so far. So some people said they used a few. So Nick's used
hmm
built a few
Also
servers.
curious if
Okay.
you used like Mastra's MCP or MCP client.
Okay. Yeah, so we will go through kind of really high level about the protocol, but I'll try to keep that short because I think the most interesting thing is the actual code, right? We came here to see code, so we're going to spend most of the time doing code, but I will get us started and yeah, so get some good chat happening here. Okay, so what's the goal? We're going to build an MCP server with tools, prompts, and resources. So those are things from the MCP spec, which we'll talk about briefly, and we're going to use Mastra to do it. Are you able to see my screen, Daniel, or not?
Yep.
And
Yeah,
it
you're
show
good.
and it shows what will we cover today. You've seen that?
No, I just
Okay.
see the yeah, I don't think it's sharing. Oh, now it's
Yeah.
what will we
Okay.
cover?
Let me just share the whole thing. Now you can see it, I hope.
Yeah, now it's
All
good.
right. So yeah, we're going to give an overview of the MCP spec, and then we're going to build and try to actually even deploy an MCP server with Mastra, and then we'll have some time for Q&A. You can ask questions during this. I would encourage you if you have a question that you want answered, try to use the Q&A, but feel free to use the chat, for casual conversations. But if you get in the Q&A, we're much more likely to be able to pull it up and answer it. Okay, so who are we? So Daniel, as you can see, has joined us. He's a staff engineer at Mastra. He was previously an engineer at Gatsby and Netlify. He's kind of our resident MCP expert. He's the one that's been going deep into the MCP spec, making sure that we support as much of the spec as possible, and we can use Mastra to build MCP servers, but also use it as an MCP client. So you can connect with Daniel there on X or Twitter, whatever you call it these days. And I am one of the founders at Mastra, the chief product officer. I was in Eng and product at Gatsby and Netlify. I built a service called AudioFeed and been doing some OSS stuff for a long time, but not to date myself too much, hopefully. You can follow me as well, smthomas3 on X. But let's talk about really quickly. And again, I'm going to go through this fast because I think that a lot of you have come from, some of you are very experienced with MCP already, and some of you are still getting started. So this might go fast for some of you that aren't as familiar with the spec, but I do want to I think you learn more by looking at real examples and demos. And so I think we'll want to optimize for that. So I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. But what is MCP? It's basically an open standard that lets you connect LLMs to systems where your data lives. So this could be like different APIs, different tools. You might want to connect to data from Notion or Google Calendar or something like that. And MCPs are kind of a protocol that's kind of built to make that a little easier. It's a little bit more of a standard. So you can kind of think of it like a USB-C port for AI applications. So it's supposed to be more of like a plug and play interface. You kind of agreed on this spec and it's pretty well defined. So before MCP, you kind of had to build these like one-off connectors and handle all these integrations for each tool you wanted to use. So it was kind of just tedious, fragile. You had to maintain a lot of glue code yourself, and it wasn't very standardized. So if we want to think about how MCP actually works, it's kind of a very simple client-server architecture that links AI models with external resources. So the server's kind of like a bridge, so it exposes certain functions to the client while it can connect to other sources. So you can see in this example, you have an MCP client, which could be Cursor or Windsurf or Claude Desktop, some kind of client. And then you have the protocol that's, kind of sits in the middle that connects to it some kind of MCP server which then might connect to other tools. In this case, maybe it's GitHub, maybe it's Slack through an API, maybe it's, content on a local file system, but there's essentially a server that just like connects to these other services, this other content or data. So there's a couple things in the spec that we're going to talk about today. So there's tools, there's prompts, there's resources, and all of this is available on, the Model Context Protocol website. There are some, the spec is still new. This is all very new. It's changing. There's a lot of draft, pieces to the spec that are coming. And we're not going to spend too much time on that, but just know that a lot of this stuff is still changing pretty rapidly. So tools, these are like actions that the model can call. You can think of these as, in our case, just like JavaScript functions in many ways. They're just tools. So it runs some code. You have prompts. These are kind of like message templates or conversation snippets that a server can provide that kind of guide interactions with how you work with LLMs. Then you have this idea of resources, which are kind of like files, URLs, embeddings, like some kind of blobs that the model some kind of content the model may read and get data from to like add to its context. The most common use case right now, most MCP servers you probably worked with only use tools. And that's because most MCP clients don't fully support all areas of the spec yet. This is changing, so like I don't even know yet if Cursor fully supports prompts or resources. Maybe they do. I do imagine they will pretty soon if they don't yet. But if you've probably worked with MCP servers, you're probably just dealing with tools so far. And so we're going to try to show you a little bit more than just that today. But just know that most MCP servers today are just they just specify tools. And there's a couple different kinds of transports for how you can run these MCP servers. One's like standard input output, STDIO, and one is like streamable HTTP. So the biggest difference is with standard input output, basically it's like it's running pretty much locally. So you run it locally. It's just it's like a package that runs on your local system. It's just JSON that kind of just gets passed back and forth. Streamable HTTP is more cloud friendly. That's where you're reaching out to some kind of server somewhere. So you're reaching out to like a cloud URL that lives somewhere outside of your machine. And this way you can kind of like stream down responses from some remote MCP server. So STDIO is much more used for like local tools, like maybe file editing tools or something like that, where streamable HTTPs might be more for connecting to, some external system or you want to run it kind of in the cloud.
Yeah, and if you've used our doc server, that's what it is. It's the standard in and out. It just pulls down the package. And so like when you use a lot of things that are like packages that are published to um like npm, like if you publish your MCP server, so that'll be the standard in and out.
Yeah. I did see someone in the chat said they don't have video. There has been some people in the past that have said like when you're using mobile, Zoom mobile, maybe the video sometimes doesn't work depending on what version you're using. It seems like, I don't know, it's some kind of Zoom issue. So if you're having trouble, if you're not seeing the video, yeah, I see someone says it's good now on their MacBook. Yeah, I don't know if that must be some kind of Zoom issue, but we've heard this in past workshops that occasionally if they're using mobile, it doesn't always show the video. But let's talk a little bit about real world applications. So companies are using MCP to connect with their internal systems. So companies might build an MCP server for their APIs, and then that way their agents can interact with their more in a more standard way with their systems. There's a lot of you've seen like maybe Cursor or Windsurf, Klein, VS Code support MCP, so you can use your code agents can connect these different servers, and that's where Daniel had mentioned our doc server. MCP also has all kinds of like growing set of connectors. There's a whole bunch of MCP registries as well, which we will, kind of talk about here in a second. And as we mentioned, we have just as real world examples, we have an MCP doc server, and again, it runs locally. It allows you to access all of Mastra's documentation from within your code editor. There's a link if you are, you could just Google it as well. But if you want to make your code editor more of an expert on Mastra and how to write Mastra code. We also have the course, which someone asked in the Q&A, and I'll try to answer that question here in a bit. But it uses the MCP doc server, but it tries to make your code editor teach you Mastra, not just write code for you, but actually walk you through step by step. And it gives you a URL so you can track your progress on a website, but you're actually just going through the course in your code editor. So Cursor, your code agent becomes your instructor rather than having, me or someone else teach you the course. So it's kind of an experimental thing we're doing as some people have said they've had a hard time getting it to interact with the agent. It does vary depending on what code editor you're using, what models within that code editor. It is very experimental. I'm hoping over time it'll be, especially with some of the other types of things we could do with the MCP spec, we can make it even better. But it is very experimental and you'll have different results. Everyone that goes through the course will have a different experience, right? Because the code agent's not going to act the same every time. But it is pretty cool. So some of the other benefits of MCP is you get the kind of unified integration. You don't need a different integration for every tool or data set. You can more easily swap to different tools, because the MCP provides that standard. Faster development, and you kind of have this separation of concerns. So you have a clean split between your AI application and then your data and tool integrations that you use. So it's much more portable. There's this idea of MCP registries, which is where you can kind of go to find these different MCP servers. There's a whole bunch of them. Zapier has kind of a plug, like a configurable one, Composio, Smithery, MCP Run, Graphlit, OpenTools, Gumloop. There's a ton of them. And so we actually at Mastra, started out as kind of like a little bit of a joke, but it is serious that there's a lot of places you can go to find these. And I think over time there'll be, we'll kind of consolidate on what the right ones are. And there is kind of a more official Anthropic or model context protocol blessed one that's available as well. But so we built this MCP registry that just lists a whole bunch of them. So if you're looking to go like where you can go find these different MCP servers you could use within your agents or within your MCP clients, you can go here. So a little bit about Mastra, and then I'll hand it over to Daniel to actually dig into some code. Mastra is the open source AI agent framework for TypeScript. You can build agents with tools, memory, and tracing. You can build workflows that have human in the loop, so you can suspend and resume. And we try to make it a really simple API, so you just call step or then or branch, and you can build these complex like graph-based workflows. We have evals, we have storage for RAG pipelines, and a local development playground. And of course, kind of as part of that tools, it also comes with MCP support. So now let's actually build an MCP server. So Daniel, I'm going to turn the screen sharing over to you. And while you get that pulled up, I'm going to see if I can answer some of these, a few of these questions that have been coming in.
Well,
So yeah, if you want to get it pulled up, so Zhao says, had a hard time start up the Mastra course to start up the MCP server on VS Code and interact with the agent. If you could touch base on that, sure, lots of people would benefit. So we do have an FAQ at the bottom of the Mastra course page. If you don't see your specific issue there, let us know. Like maybe we're very active on our Discord. So if you want to drop into our Discord or, obviously shoot me an email after this and we can try to get a little bit more documentation on that. But yeah, it is, another thing we're doing is we're going to add a little bit more of a tutorial video of how to do it. So maybe that'll help as well. So that's coming soon. What's the planned release schedule for additional 101 course pieces? Heard workflows are coming up. Yes, workflows will hopefully be released maybe tomorrow, but more likely it's probably not going to go out until, I guess it has to go out with our next release. So it'll probably go out on Tuesday next week. So workflows should be available next Tuesday, and then there might be some MCP stuff as well that comes out, following that. And Daniel, there's a question you'll probably mention, but is there a semantic for stateful MCP, e.g. for including memory?
um, yes, yeah. So I'm going to touch on not necessarily stateful, but passing messages between like the client and the server. But MCP is essentially for either like calling tools or figuring out a way to like add context to the LLM. So the memory itself should exist with like the agent or your application.
Awesome. Okay, so there's a couple more questions. If tools are just API, how does the model know which API to call depending on user interaction? I think we'll probably see that in in the workshop, but tool descriptions are important. I'll leave it at that. And then if, please let us know if we didn't answer your question as we go through the content. I think we'll kind of cover that though. And what's the correct approach for interacting with MCP via an API? I think we'll probably cover some of that too. So if not, please ask the question again as we get through the content, but I'm gonna hand it over to you, Daniel, and let's look at some code.
Cool. So I'm just going to create a fresh Mastra project. Yes. Okay, let's do my MCP demo workshop. So I'm just going to go through the prompts here and just get the project itself scaffolded, and then I'll bring up a plan and kind of go through uh, what we're going to be creating. So it'll take just a second here. I guess I could have done this while you were answering questions, but not always thinking
Yeah.
ahead.
I did kind of try to set you up for that.
Okay, let's set up. This step here is pretty important. Make your IDE into a Mastra expert. That's kind of what we were talking about before with our doc server. So this just installs the doc server in Cursor. So I'm just going to use PNPM instead of uh, NPM.
Had to get fancy.
Yeah. Okay. Now I'm gonna guess I have to make this a bit bigger too. Is that good? Is that too big?
You probably can never be too big. I think that's good though.
Okay. Then I'll get a prompt here to enable the server, the doc server. So it scaffolded me some things. We get uh, an example weather agent, example weather tool, example workflows. Not necessarily going to use any of that, but so let's just, so I'm just going to copy over what we want to go through. Great. So did this already. And so the first thing we're going to do is create an MCP server and attach it to the Mastra instance. So um, the MCP server that we're going to create is going to be uh, an app to manage your notes. So just having like a bunch of notes and being able to like to write them and do different actions on the notes itself. So pretty simple. So I'm going to ask the agent, so can you make me an MCP server uh, and attach it to the Mastra instance?
So this is interesting. I didn't see it call the tool.
Yeah, I don't think it. Oh, there it
Oh, there
goes.
it is.
After it
Yeah.
struggled for a bit, it said, "Okay, fine. I'll give in and ask for help."
Yeah, it is interesting. Like this is like takes live demoing to a new level because we have no idea what what the
Yeah.
LLM's going to do here. It may or may not
Luckily,
work.
luckily I have all the final codes saved. So if we do run into any snags or if things are taking us a while, I can just port it in.
Yeah, every time is different, slightly different. But it is writing some code for us, so that's cool to see.
Okay, great. So it's not necessarily doing what I want, but it's not doing not what I want. It's I'm not going to use these workflows, tools, or agents. So actually, maybe I'll just delete them for now so it doesn't get confused. I'm just gonna stop this for now. Gonna remove these. Um, this isn't something I'm going over in this workshop, but it's a neat thing that you can just pass your agent or your workflow into an MCP server and you get an automatic tool from it. So agent, you'll get like an ask agent tool, and workflow, you'll get a run workflow tool. Okay. And I don't want and accept this. I don't actually want this. All I care about right now is the MCP server. I'm going to remove these. Okay. Now let's go back to our plan. So if I run the, uh, if I run dev, let's just take a look at what the playground looks like. Oh, I think I might have some code left over. Oh, I
Yeah.
think I do need a tool.
Yeah, you're gonna need a tool, I think. And there's a question that came in. I'll answer. Do we need to add some description for MCP to let the LLM know what our MCP is able to do? The answer is yes. There at least it's very, especially tool descriptions are very important because you your LLM will use the tool descriptions to decide when it should call a tool from your MCP server. So we're going to create a tool here, I think, next. And
Hmm.
I would just encourage you all to spend a lot of time on your tool descriptions, add more information. So if you were to give these tools to a human, they would know which one to use. Because if you couldn't have you know, a human easily decide, then it's going to be very difficult for the LLM to make sure it calls the right tool.
Okay, yeah. So let's write a tool to make this MCP server happy. So can you write a tool that is called write note, and the purpose of it is to get a title and some content, and we'll write to a directory called notes. Okay, it looks like we got a tool now. And it added my tool in. Let's accept these. These look good. Now let's see if it's happy. Okay, so we have it running on this port. So now you can click through. I don't have any agents set up, so this makes sense. I don't have any agent networks. My tool, I can see it over here. I go to my MCP server, I can see it here. Workflows don't have anything, and runtime context. I'm not going to go through that in this workshop. So I can go into my MCP server here. I can try out my tool. I could see how to install it into Cursor or Windsurf. And then I can also get the URLs for how to use streamable HTTP or server sent events. So let's just test out this tool, see what happens. So we get a file path, and it looks like, did it write anything? Where is it writing to? Maybe let's log out where it thinks it's writing to.
And one comment is you saw in there that we have SSE and streamable HTTP. I didn't cover that in the beginning. It's because SSE is kind of being, I don't know if it's officially deprecated, but I think it over time, streamable HTTP is going to be where most of these things end up landing. So we support both, but
Hmm.
I would say most people are moving towards streamable HTTP, but maybe not all clients support it yet.
Yeah, exactly. Um, and so it's building it in, it's adding the notes in my output directory. So I'm just going to grab a code snippet to make it not do that. So let's use this instead. Okay, now let's try this again, see where it writes to. Okay, so now it's in here. I have my note. Okay, great. So now let's go back to, so we have it attached to our Mastra instance. We have a tool. Okay, let's add some resources. So in this case, the markdown notes are going to be the resources. So can you add resources to my MCP server where the resources are the markdown notes in the notes directory? Okay. I'll be intentionally vague here just to see if it's able to pull through and actually create the full like resources spec. So it's reading some documentation. It's looking at RAG. I think it's a little bit confused. I'm just going to stop it. Uh,
The stop button is always your friend.
yeah. But every now and again, you just send your message and walk around a bit and don't monitor it and come back and find out that it's off its rails. Uh, don't use RAG, use MCP server resources.
Resources are so new, even the LLMs are struggling.
Okay, maybe I'll guide it a bit more. Let's stop this. Let's reject the changes. So inside of, okay, let's create a new file, resources. Let's import that. Instead of making a new tool, can you use these server resources? This is the last attempt. Otherwise, I'm just gonna copy what I have, just so we get this thing moving.
I imagine everyone here, if they've used tools like Cursor, have run into frustrating, yeah, loops where it can sometimes be incredibly helpful and sometimes be incredibly frustrating, depending on what you're asking it to do. So we get to struggle together today.
Okay, it's not quite understanding. Oh, this looks better. It's kind of got an interesting implementation going on here. Yeah, you know what? I'm just gonna just copy in and explain. So we have some resources here, and with we have we export our resource handlers. I'm gonna just so that would be resource. I think it's just this. Great. So that satisfies that. So with the resource handlers, we just need to provide uh, two functions to it. So one is like, how do you actually fetch your resources? So I have this list function. And so this list function is just going to read a file system. But you can imagine you have a database somewhere that you're reading some resources. It can be like shared resources between teams, things like that, user specific resources. So we have to tell the server, how do you actually want to fetch your resources? And each resource uh, returns it in this format. So we have a URI, so it could be like a file path or URL. We have a name, description, and the type of content it is. And then we have how do you actually read a specific resource? And so we have this read function, and I'm just reading from the file system and returning the content. Okay, so now we have resources. Let's add some prompts. And I don't know if this is on stable release yet. So I'm going to install alpha packages for all of these.
Living on the edge.
Yeah, on living on the cutting edge. I'm going to stop that, do
So
an
to
install.
to recap what we've done so far, we've created an MCP server with a tool to create a note. We've then added resources so it can basically get that context of the notes, correct?
Mhm.
And then now we're going to add prompts. And what's the purpose of adding the prompts?
Prompts is a way to like nudge the user in the right direction to prompt the the LLM to use to use the MCP server in the way that it's intended, to use the MCP server and its like resources. And
Awesome.
so let's add some
And in just a time check, we have
in,
about 20 minutes.
okay, cool. Some MCP. That's why you're here, keeping me honest.
Keeping you moving.
You add some MCP server prompts. Uh, one to create a new note, one to summarize the note, and the last to brainstorm ideas. Okay, let's see. Okay, so it's interesting. It keeps on referring to the MCP overview documentation that it's kept in its memory the whole time. Okay, so it's not. Don't write an agent. Let's reject this. My MCP server. Okay, let's see if with a
And,
little bit more explicit instructions, it does the right thing.
and yeah, and just for those of you that are looking at this and saying, well, you don't necessarily have to use a code agent to write this stuff, right? We have docs available on this. That's what the code agent is supposed to be using anyways. So the other alternative for doing this is go to our docs website, the old, kind of the old-fashioned way of writing this stuff. Go to the docs website, find the code samples and the documentation, copy them into your code, and then edit, of course, as you need it for what you need it to do.
Yeah, and I'm coding this way because I'm just resting my fingers. Had a long coding day yesterday, so I'm letting the agent do the work today.
You're out of your fingers are out of shape.
Okay, seems to be struggling again. So so this should be here. I don't need to type that. Instead of ID, it will be name. And I'll just copy this. And so this is just to list the prompts. And then I've filled in the scaffolding. We just need a function for get prompt for how to actually create the prompt when requested in get prompt. This whole thing is really just a test of my prompting skills. Okay, it's getting closer. Cool. So it was able to create the prompt messages. And so with this, we just get a name and with the name, we'll just return the specific prompt. Okay, so let's review. That looks right. Okay, so now we have resources. Now we have prompts. Let's go back to our plan. Let's see. Okay, so make prompts dynamic. I'm not going to get the LLM to struggle through this one. But essentially, when we make a call to get the prompts, so right now you're looking at these, they're just static prompts. You can kind of with that, um, you can kind of just move it into your um, front end. And so it's like, why do you need to have this like dynamic functionality? Or sorry, why do you need this like static prompts? Like what good is that? And so it starts to get really interesting when you start creating these system prompts dynamically with some information passed in. So it could even be like user ID, and then you can fetch some user preferences to create a system prompt based off of like some type of like information. So in this case, I'm just going to copy in the final product here. And so I'm going to install these. These are just uh, utilities to help parse Markdown. And so what I'm doing now is I'm passing the name and I'm passing some arguments. The argument includes the note content. So in this prompt for summarized note, I can analyze the markdown, pull some information out of it, and give the user a system prompt. And I'm going to show what this all looks like practically, like when you're using it in a front end in a few minutes. And then same thing with brainstorm ideas. We can take some like topics, note content, all this stuff to generate a dynamic prompt here. Cool. So this is I'm going to bring in the front end app. And I wonder it'll be actually easier to just move over to the other repo and run that. Okay, so I'm gonna have to bump this up. And how are we doing with it? Any questions so far that people have been asking that I
Yeah.
maybe should pause here for a second?
Yeah, I'm answering some in the chat. One question, possibly insane or naive question. Is there a pattern for an LLM lending its brain to an MCP? So the MCP can use the client's LLM to think and do stuff. So the answer is I don't think that's possible. Typically it's for the
So
LLM. Go
I'm
ahead.
gonna so it is possible. So there's a part of the MCP spec called sampling, which is essentially this. This is not something that we support yet, and a lot of clients and servers don't actually, uh, like server frameworks don't actually support it yet. It's still one of like, as you were talking earlier, Shane, there's a lot of this MCP stuff is cutting edge, and because the users of MCP and the creators of MCP servers are still kind of in the earlier stages. So tools is kind of what most people are interested in. People are kind of dipping their toes into like resources and prompts now, but then you get more advanced things like sampling. And so essentially what sampling is uh, the MCP server can send a prompt to the LLM and say, hey, can you run this prompt for me and give me the response? And so because MCP doesn't have any kind of like LLM attached to it, doesn't have any like API keys attached to it. And so it's a way of basically doing that, like hijacking the the client's agent or LLM to like do some kind of like task. So it could be like you get all this context and then the MCP server says like, whoa, that's a lot of like context. Can you take this whole blob, summarize it for me, and then I'll run like the MCP tools on it or like whatever I was going to run.
So that I learned something new today because I didn't know that that was part of the spec yet. So that's
Yeah.
cool. You could also, of course, especially in Mastra, have an agent that runs in your MCP server. So you could use your own LLM, right? Especially if it was like a streamable HTTP, but that might not be what you want. So sounds like, Nate, to answer your question, like it technically is possible, but the support isn't maybe completely there yet, but it likely will be over time.
I think something's running on this port. And I realized I actually made some changes. I was pointing to the deployed version. So 1 second, I'm just going to fix that.
All right, this will be so for those of you that maybe have jumped in late, we are building an MCP server with Mastra. We have added a tool, we added resources, and now we just added prompts to this MCP server. So those are three parts of the spec. And then we are now, kind of moment of truth, going to start to see it actually take place. So we spent a lot of time just looking at code, but now
Mhm.
it's going to start to come together a bit more.
So I'm running my MCP server in this window. I'm going to run my agent that the front end's going to interact with. Okay, let me just restart this. Oh, because it's trying to connect to had the wrong port again. Okay, let's try this one more time. Okay, running my agent. Still. Okay, maybe I'll just run it from the cloud playground. Let's see if it's happier with that. Okay. And then let me run the front end. So before this workshop, I went and hosted the MCP server in uh in Master Cloud. And so I have this endpoint here. So that's what I'm using in the code right now. And we have this will look very familiar if you're familiar with the playground. It should we're trying to get parity with it or parity for the most part, and it looks like we're this looks very familiar to what we were using it or showing in the playground earlier. So
Yeah,
if I
and
go,
so essentially all you did there, Daniel, was you basically created a Git repo and pushed it up to Master Cloud, so it's live rather than just running on your machine.
yeah, exactly. And so I'm not using the like this local version here. I have this version here, which is a mono repo of my MCP server, my notes, and my notes are like my fake database, and then my front end application. And so this is what we'll share the Git repo for this after. And so this is what you'll have to like play around with. And so let's take a look at our application. Okay, and it's not pulling up the notes here. Something with, let me just try to fix this quick.
Live demos. And if you do have any questions as we're trying to fix this issue, please drop them in the chat. Um,
Let me see, maybe I don't need to clone it and I can just, I think we
yes.
might have had a fix recently that we no longer need to do that.
And there was a question, so in the live example, you're using Zod to model the tool. Does Mastra support standard schema? I think we support Zod, and you can also use maybe JSON schema, I think, if that's right. I don't know. But we're 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 fans of Zod, so you can use Zod. I don't know if we actually technically support standard schema, so I'm not that familiar with what that is.
Okay, this Seems to always fun doing a live demo. Um, Let me try to get it just working locally again instead.
The live demo never quite goes to plan.
Let's see what was. Okay, so it should be this. Let me just make sure I don't have any lingering processes. PMPM. Okay, that's looking good. Let's hope this all. Okay, so I have my MCP server here, and then my agent running in my front end, and fingers crossed. There we go. Okay, so now it's pulling in my resources. So I just have this notes app where I have an agent that you can talk to alter the notes here. And so um, what we kind of like went through what prompts can look like. So um, if I type a slash here, I get this list of prompts I can choose. So let's go with new daily note. And so it's going to give me a prompt here to get started.
So that's
Let's send
essentially
that.
so that's essentially a template then.
Yeah, exactly. So we got an error here. Let's just try that again.
Getting failed to
Oh,
get
there
API.
might have been a when I didn't install, there might have been a new version. I'm using Copilot Kit to render this UI here.
We
Let's
are
see
we
if
are for those of you that are still here, we are coming up on time, so we might go maybe we'll go a minute or two late to try to get this thing working, but understand if you do have to drop, the recording will be posted on our YouTube channel. You'll get an email too in a few hours that'll have links to all this stuff. So you can see the result and you'll be able to pull down the code and actually try it out yourself.
okay, so Copilot Kit is having an issue. Maybe I did need this. So I'm just going to revert that and see if that fixes it. I'll try once more, then just kind of walk through um, what the intention was. It might not be so interesting watching me sit here and debug this. Okay, fingers crossed. Okay, let's see what happens. Let's do new note. Oh, the error didn't pop up right away. So it created my new note. So there's some things still not quite working with this. I'm not going to fix them right now because we're at time. But I'll just walk you through quickly what the intention was. So with resources, um, let me just find my MCP server. So with resources, there's a way to communicate between server and client. So uh, you can, an MCP server has these two um, functions on them, basically notifications that you send to the client. So when your resources list change, so let's say you like change some metadata about a resource or delete or create a resource, you'd want to send this notification. Or if the content of a specific resource changes, then you want to send this notification. And so this is the MCP side of things. And so the client itself has to uh, respond to that notification. So if I look at how uh, the client is set up here, so we get this client, we point it to our MCP server. So we give it a URL, we give it an ID, so it doesn't need to recreate the client every single time. It can reuse client. So you can imagine that the ID for the client would probably be like a user ID if lots of users are using your application. So it doesn't need to recreate the client for every single user. And then these two is basically uh, registering a handler. So when the resource list changes, we can do some sort of action. So in this case, I'm just emitting an event saying the resources or the notes have changed. And then we can also set this handler for uh, when a specific content of a resource changes. And so what this looks like, so if I look at where I'm actually handling this, um, I have this API route here, so it's just listening to this, and when it receives that, it'll send the message to my front end. So my front end can react uh, uh, responsively to like the resources changing. And so you can imagine if you have a whole team of people working on something, um, when somebody changes a resource, your client would also get a notification if you've subscribed. And so there's one last thing. A client can subscribe to updates from a specific resource or unsubscribe to it. So it kind of like completes the cycle of just making sure that a given client is always up to date on like what the resource is. So you imagine if you're like editing a page, you'd probably want, and that page is using some sort of resource, you probably want to subscribe to that resource with the client that you're using and just get real-time updates there.
Awesome. Well, we do need to wrap up. Thank you, everyone, for those that have joined. I will encourage you all to check the recording and stay tuned to your email. We'll send you the GitHub link so you can actually dig through the code. I know we went through a lot of stuff really fast and had a few little hiccups along the way, but taking a look at the code might make a lot of it clearer of how it all works and pulling it down and getting it set up locally so you can actually run this thing and see how you can spin up your own MCP servers and get it working with your own Mastra agents as well. So thank you all for attending. Any parting words, Daniel? Anything else that you want to close up on?
Oh, I guess we should share the URL for the workshop here. I'll post it
Okay.
in the chat.
Yeah, I did drop the GitHub link once, but we should drop it again. And for those of you that are, if you're still here, if you haven't already, please do go to the Mastra GitHub and give us a star. We appreciate that. Please follow or check out our Discord if you do have questions. That's the best place to go to talk to others on the team. Or a lot of us are in there, quite a bit most days, just chatting, answering questions, trying to help out. So let us know how we can help, and we hope to see you at a future workshop. All
Right.
right.
Thank you.
See y'all
Bye.
later.